level setting on it. The context of the discussion tonight is in light of some of the Supreme Court cases that are there, and sharing some of what was discussed in the last couple months at like for example, the National Catholic Prayer Breakfast, and some of the things that are happening at a high level globally, and in the United States in particular. The focus is going to be on religious freedom, particularly in healthcare, and I'll explain why. It's because why healthcare is a target and why some of the things are taking place in healthcare. So that's going to be the focus of the discussion, is to just share and bring everybody some of the updates that are taking place. There's so much going on. So as far as the agenda, we'll go over the, let me get this out of the way here. Hold on, let me go back. We'll go over the environment that we're in today, which is an apostolic age. I'll explain that in a second. The role and impact of politics and law. What does a church teach about what law should be, particularly religious freedom? What is religious freedom? There's a basic belief that you're allowed to go to church. That's religious freedom. Religious freedom is much, much more than that. And we look at the world as far as what's impacting religious freedom versus what we're living and what's religious freedom infringement in our own country here. What's the arena, why healthcare is a key battlefield, and some key cases, particularly at the Supreme Court level, federal, state, and global. And then what can we do? And I have at the end a little bit of the history in the agrupación that I pulled out from it, some push, really encouragement and beliefs that in particular Padre Rey was sharing in Cuba regarding the ACU and viewing the political landscape, the legal landscape from an apostolic perspective. To start, in Washington, it was about 1,000 people gathered to speak about religious freedom, and there was a cardinal there speaking from Nigeria about what they're going through, which is absolutely awful. Every day they're going through that, and real physical abuses and picking on the Catholic faith in particular. There is a book that's made its way around the country and Catholic circles called, and we had a talk here in the ACU last year on this very book, and it just, you feel the ACU described in the book as far as organizations, institutions, and individuals rising up in times of apostolic mission. And the main tenet of it is that we are no longer in Christendom. What does that mean? We're really past Christendom. We're not at the end. We've been past Christendom. Christendom is a time, as described back in 1974 already. Fulton Sheen was saying we were past, Archbishop Fulton Sheen, we're already past Christendom. We were at the end of Christendom in 1974. What is meant by that? Christendom is when the economic, the political, the social life is basically inspired by Christian principles. That's not our world today, right? We've seen it die. But he did go on to say, and Llorente used to speak like this quite a bit to us, these are great and wonderful days in which to be alive. It's not a gloomy picture. We, therefore, must live our lives in the full consciousness of the hour we're in and rally close to the heart of Christ and respond. John Paul II said, even in many past evangelized countries, Christian society measured on gospel values is now gone. This is during John Paul II. We're well into what is being described as apostolic mission, away from Christendom when everything's influenced from Christian principles. But you know what? In the history of the church going through these cycles, in times of apostolic mission, it's when we're called upon and when society has been called upon and when the church has grown the strongest and the most and has defined itself the best. That's what we're in right now. So we have challenge against us. Our society's erosion. In an apostolic time, in an end when it's not Christendom, it's influenced so much by the culture, the technology. Think of the talk we had a couple weeks ago by the couple that was presenting here. The media, religion, law, which we'll speak about today, tradition, social, political, geographic, economic, and artistic. Everything is so intertwined that all these sectors of life influence each other almost as one and the same. So we're now battling as to the morality of many things considered very basic in our country: abortion, euthanasia, same-sex marriage, gender ideology, and on and on and on. And it tends to be especially the most educated have a difficult time seeing and evaluating the time we're in and what is true and what is good. Only faith and reason can see through that. For our faith gives us God himself, the whole explanation and narrative of the human race, who we are, who God is, our purpose, our situation, the future, and how we should live. The role and impact in particular of law in all of that, and politics. So think of our country. Politics is now entertainment. Politics is now shaping culture. It's not downstream from culture, it's part of culture. So people talk about every single day. It was in the newspapers today, front page, yesterday, the day before, and I'll share some of those. And it's become very politicized, all of these aspects of religion and social issues and politics, entertainment, technology, etc. We went through a book a few years ago in the ACU called How the Church Built Western Civilization. One of those chapters was on how the church impacted law and how law impacted society. Law is derived from natural and moral law, the Old Testament, the gospel, key saints, and the development of canon law. Further, through the codification and promulgation of these systemic bodies of law, it impacts, coming from Catholic belief, it impacts and influences how people live and how society gets structured. And that's happened throughout history. And that happened in Europe, and that happened here. So what is and what do we need to know about religious liberty within the law and within our Constitution? So we're following this flow of the impact of society, the structure of society, the impact law and politics has on it, and vice versa. And we have direction from Vatican II in a very, very important and not a long document, and it's consistent with Lumen Gentium and everything, of course, Dignitas Humanae. And here's some key principles coming from that in describing religious liberty. And let's think about the world we're in right now. The religious liberty proclaims a right of the person and of communities to social and civil freedom in religious matters. Check. In order that this freedom, willed by God and inscribed in human nature, may be exercised. So think about this. No obstacle in society should be placed in its way, since the truth cannot be imposed except by virtue of its own truth. The dignity of the person and the very nature of the quest for God require that all men and women should be free from every constraint in the area of religion. Now we get narrower. Society and the state must not force a person to act against his conscience or prevent him from acting in conformity with it. Now this is gonna lead us into the laws that are before us today. The right to religious freedom, unfortunately, is being violated, this is back then, by many states, even to the point that imparting catecheses, having it imparted and receiving it become punishable offenses. The right to religious freedom includes the right to evangelize, includes the right to share the truth and not be silenced to it, the right for parents to parent their children, the right for educators to educate students, the right for doctors to be able to give care and to love their patients, and for patients to seek the care they wish. This is religious freedom. This means the right to evangelize, all of those things. So keep that in mind as we look at these couple of these laws that we're going through. Coming from the compendium, the social doctrine of the church, 4 key points. Considering the human person as the foundation and purpose of the political community means, in the first place, working to recognize and respect human dignity through defending and promoting fundamental human rights and inalienable. So human rights of every single person in our society is key. In law, human rights must be defended, but not only that, and protected and promoted, which support the right to even love. It is a grave duty of conscience, so then now we as individuals, we also have a duty not to cooperate in practices. Think of give to Caesar what is Caesar's and to God what is God. Although certain things might be the law and permitted by legislation, but they're contrary to God's law. We have a duty to oppose and have a duty not to follow certain things imposed on us if they are contrary to God's law. And that starts to get very, very hairy in our society. A refusal to follow or cooperate with a moral evil act is a basic human right, which civil law itself is obliged to recognize and protect. We call that in our society, you see it a lot in healthcare, but with other things, the right of conscience and conscience protection. Saying that may be the law, but you gotta have an exception for the individual to say, but not me, because my faith is against that. And I have a right to practice my faith, whether it's in education, whether it's in media, whether it's in the application of technology, and whether it's in healthcare. Types of laws being encountered today. Federal and state laws and actions regarding all sorts of things, particularly abortion, post-Dobbs. That created a waterfall of all sorts of laws and regulations of activity at the state level. We have a very, very large, and we'll get into that, arm of the government called HHS, Health and Human Services, which is a very, very powerful and big organization that affects all of our lives from a regulatory perspective. Abortion is all over the map. In vitro fertilization, we're going to speak about that a little bit in a second. Palliative care, which France just announced is calling it aid in dying. The use of terminology, as we heard again a few weeks ago, is very much taking place in our society, but it's euthanasia. Contraceptives, parental rights, the FACE Act, we've heard a little bit about that you're not allowed to even pray or protest in certain cases outside abortion clinics. There's a lot of things in the budget bill. So it's not a law, it's not a regulation, but it's a budget of the United States. And there's a lot that you can do inside even a budget, and that's where the money is there to support particular views, agendas, etc. And education, you heard Eric say that earlier, education across the board, we know that we're not going to be going into the educational space today, has a lot of laws that are taking place. Why is healthcare then? Think of healthcare in our country. Why is healthcare the main battlefield for these things? Our cultural fight, a legal fight, a monetary fight. Why is there such a focus? And you can just look at the laws that are being passed and the regulations for a lot of reasons. Number one, every human person, think of any other sector, not even education. Healthcare is the sector that impacts every single human person throughout the entire lifespan of your journey. From conception to death, you go through the healthcare system. There's not a person that escapes it. So the healthcare system in our country captures every person, okay? Money. HHS's budget is $1 trillion. And above that, just for healthcare. Over 20% of the gross domestic product of our country is healthcare. If our healthcare system was a country, it would be the 5th largest country in the world. Our healthcare system. There's a lot of money in it, okay? Control, ability to control the culture, influence the culture, behavior. There's electoral impact. depending on who and what is getting things from the healthcare system and who's going through it and who's giving it to it, etc. And it affects all aspects of human life. Not only does it have every human being going through it, it affects every aspect of a human life. From the beginning, genetic research, parts of bringing a human being together, contraceptives, abortion, palliative care, drugs, medication, mental illness, population control, on and on and on. And with technology, every day it's changing so fast. And for the most part, when you look at a lot of what's happening and a lot of the laws, what's driving it, and ACA had a lot to do, when you look at it and you speak to different people, there's a measurement, there's a cost attributable to the human person, a usefulness in the arguments behind the laws that are being passed. Is this old person worth any more value? They're costing society a lot of money. No one's coming to see them. It's time for them to die. The baby, if you think about that, and the contraceptive, and you look at certain countries like that, 99%, I think it's in Iceland. Children, you don't see Down syndrome people being born anymore because 99% of them are being detected and aborted. And you look at the value of society. This person has this sickness. We'll talk about the UK and what they've done in the UK about valuing human life. It's not value. It's measured by a very, very different lens, and it's evil. So some key cases. Right now, before the Supreme Court, we'll get a ruling in June. It's taking place out of circumstances in Idaho. And it has to do with something called EMTALA, the Emergency Medical Treatment and Active Labor Act. Keeping a very high level, but in a nutshell, HHS is requiring emergency departments, despite Idaho's very protective and pro-life laws, HHS is requiring that this emergency medical treatment law, which is meant to be used if someone goes to an emergency room, that they have to be treated. They can't be denied. They don't have money. They got to be cared for. They've got to be treated. And if they can't, then they've got to find the closest medical facility to transfer them, but do everything they can to care for them there. HHS is within that, which is actually contrary to the languages in EMTALA, is defining abortion as an emergency treatment, and it's requiring doctors without conscience protections to engage in the abortion. This is post-Dobbs as a measure to make abortion available, including in states like Idaho, to have the ability to have an abortion, and is taking the otherwise well-established definition of this regulation and changing it to make it as a vehicle for abortion. And it goes against the state law and the conscious protections that are there. A lot is going to come from this case because you have majority opinions, dissenting opinions, and this is going post-Dobbs, where abortion is supposed to be decided at the state now, not at the federal level. You have federal regulation, not law, impacting and going in a state that is giving protections against abortion and for doctors as a symbolic or as a representation of the bigger picture. So a lot is taking place in this one case. Supreme Court, mifepristone. It's an abortion drug. I have it in my bag here. The number one way of abortion, 60% of abortions now. It was in the paper today, right? It's all over the paper. Pills now account for nearly 2/3 of abortion in the United States. And what happens when women actually go through this, that's not being discussed, but there was one amicus brief just filed by the Justice Foundation with 30,000 women explaining what they've been through and what harm it caused to their bodies to take mifepristone. And think about what's happening here. FDA withdrew some of the protections and safeguards that were already there and required by law. They took away some of the informed consent, meaning having to meet with the doctor and follow certain processes and procedures to protect the woman stripped away. So now you have telemedicine basically having a federal abortion process in place, supported and sanctioned by the federal government and put forth by the federal government nationally, is another means of abortion that didn't exist prior, and it's usurping, at the end of the day, usurping what the Supreme Court just ruled in Dobbs. So this is going before the Supreme Court. And you have this happening through telehealth. By the way, Walgreens and CVS will be offering the mifepristone drug now in all the states that allow them to do it, but it's going to be offered by the pharmacies. So the 2/3 you have now, and there's articles in all the different journals and papers today on the amount of abortions. They now had last year the largest amount of abortions since 2011. And with the abortion drugs, the lack of information, and the availability of them, and the federal government supporting it across the country, this is really an unbelievable crisis. And again, it's looking at religious freedom, conscious protections, things being brought forth before us through law, through politics, and it has an impact on society. And it's become very political as well. In a Colorado case, Bella Health and Wellness Center, one of the premier health and wellness centers, pregnancy centers as well, in the country. I visited them in Denver. They have a beautiful 24-hour adoration. It looks like a spa, and they treat women off the street. They treat poor women, wealthy women. Now it's expanded to families, and they treat about 10,000 patients a year. They've had women, I encourage you to go to their website. They have a beautiful testimony and video of a woman that was given the reversal pill when the woman took mifepristone in order to save the baby, and the baby was saved. But they were prevented in Colorado through state regulation, banned from offering the abortion reversal bill. They fought that, and we'll talk about the different groups that are helping to do that, and Colorado backed off. But there's another example. So here's an example of a state saying not only are they pushing the abortion drug, they're saying you can't even reverse it, right? For those that are trying to help patients with that.
I don't understand that. I never heard of this. What is this exactly?
There is a medication that can be given to women within a certain period of time that will stop the impact. I mean, one of the doctors in the room can get into the medical aspect of it, but it reverses. It reverses the killing that's taking place, beginning to take place with the abortion drug, and it stops that, what's happening in the body, and reverses that with the progesterone and the different kinds of hormones that are being.
The state sought to ban the use of progesterone to reverse the effects of the abortion pill. So they wanted to stop these providers from being able to reverse the abortion. Is that 100% effective?
No. It's not 100% effective, the reversal pill, but it has been highly effective when done by a certain period of time and promoted and made it known to women who come into the clinics that is available, and it does.
I guess it's like, it'd be safe to assume that those that go through that reversal, it may affect the baby when born.
It could, in this case. Yeah, so the question is, in the abortion reversal medication, is it always successful? No. Has it been successful? Yes. And when done within a certain time, does it have a high success rate? Yes, within a certain period of time, and it gives a chance to stop and reverse what's taken place in the momentum there. Do the babies get impacted as a result of that particular medication? The ones that I've seen and researched is that the babies have not turned out that way. I don't know how easy it is to tell whether that medication or the actual abortion pill medication, when you have the two going on together, cause any kind of deformities or a death, etc.
We know the answer to this question because when they were sued, what did the state of Colorado do? They backed off. They backed off, which means that this is not a clinical issue. Hello? Okay.
Perfect.
So what the state wanted to do was to stop the reversal of the abortion pill. And the rationale was political, it was not clinical. It was not that this was hurting the babies or that it was causing more complications, because the abortion pill causes complications, progesterone can cause complications, we all know that. But the outcome here tells us the real reason and the real situation. Because had the issue been a clinical issue, a clinical finding issue, what would the state have done? They would have fought the suit, and they would not have backed off of the prohibition that they had imposed. As soon as they were sued by Beckett, what did they do? They reversed the law.
Yeah, they couldn't fight the medicine.
And Bella has had great success in their particular clinic, to the point, again, we would encourage you to go and look at the video. It's very compelling that they have on the site, and just the outcome of all the patients that come and see them.
You were saying it must be given within a certain number of days. Here in our website, it says must be given less than 71 days. So it is not like a week or 2 weeks. We're talking about 60 days, 70 days, which is already when things are pretty much far ahead of just calling it out.
I just wanted to say one statement. There's no reason in the emergency room in a hospital to perform an abortion outside of an ectopic pregnancy. The majority of abortion with major medical problems the majority of the abortions can be avoided, because most high-risk pregnancies with the technology and the medications that we have today can carry the woman through. So the issue of having an abortion in the emergency room is inconsequential, because if a woman has a tubal ligation, that is standard medical procedure. You do not need a law saying that you must do an abortion. That is standard care, and they're confusing the audience with something that is non-existent, that the woman must have a defense of the state to have an abortion. There's no such thing as a legitimate abortion in an emergency room outside of an ectopic pregnancy.
And that's what the amicus briefs, exactly right, that's what the amicus briefs have articulated in there. And they're worth reads. We don't have enough time to go into a lot of this in depth, or to go into much depth at all, but this is the premise of it, and this is the gist of it, of what we're seeing. HHS, right? So help. Okay, Luis.
Quick question here. What is the plan for Walgreens and CVS to be? Is it by prescription or over the counter? What is it?
Prescription. And it's going to vary by state law. So if a state law says it's not required, it does not require a prescription, then they wouldn't require a prescription.
It's also very interesting what the states are pushing. They're pushing that the nurse practitioners, the advanced level of care practitioners of medicines, should be allowed to perform abortions, which is another sneaky way of getting around the physician. So this is totally something that is unsafe for the woman, to have a nurse practitioner who has no background in high-risk OB pregnancies to do this kind of a thing. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. HHS. So there is, and I'm just going to mention the name, inside the Affordable Care Act, there's a section called 1557, and it's a civil rights provision section. What HHS has added, or is trying to add in here, is a new definition of what's a protected class, which gives rights to sue and penalties, etc. So they're adding that the right to termination of pregnancy and transgenderism are protected classes. What does that mean? What does that do? Refusing to perform abortions and refusing to provide transgender treatments then has penalties and punishments, etc., and it sets a tone. It treats all of that as a protected class, and it could have the impact of removing hospital funding. Payments get withdrawn to the individual doctors. Patients can sue. It's a proposed rule that's clear. It's getting towards final rule, and the conscience protections are weakened in all of that. This has been tracking over the last year. Many groups have been part of this, looking at it, and all of these things, again, here's through regulation, through terminology. It has a domino effect and impact within structures that already exist in the law. So it takes law And if you can add something to it or change it around and it fits within the structure, it changes the whole structure completely when it comes to life and when it comes to religious liberty and conscience protection around it. Parental custody. Here's an example of one, also within the healthcare. This just happened. The Supreme Court, they didn't want to hear this because the child already became 18. It's kind of like a moot point, right? But this is the case that happened, and I believe this was also Beckett. You had parents that lost their child to the state in Indiana because the parents did not want to recognize their son's transgender choice to female. The state took the child away from the parents and took custody away from the parents. And the parents didn't want to give them the therapy that they needed, etc. But this is what happened. And now that the child's 18, they're still battling, but it's not going to go to the Supreme Court right now. But these kinds of cases are ripening up. This has been going on in Canada, for example, for years. And I'll get to the UK cases in a second. In vitro fertilization. This is last week, all over the news, all over the media. The presidential candidates have spoken about this. So the Alabama Supreme Court ruled recently that frozen embryos constitute children under the state statute. And it was an 8-1 ruling. And so when they came and ruled that an embryo is a human life, you can no longer practice in vitro fertilization the way it's practiced, because in many instances you destroy the embryo or you freeze the embryo indefinitely. I can't go into all of it, but one of the most beautiful things you will read about life, for those of you who don't know about him, it warrants an entire charla just on Jerome Lejeune. Apparently, Jerome Lejeune is who John Paul II looked to write Evangelium Vitae. The influence for Evangelium Vitae was Jerome Lejeune. They were very, very close friends. And he was the first one named to John Paul II's Pontifical Council on Family and Life. Jerome Lejeune was a geneticist that discovered Down syndrome as having an additional chromosome, the 21st chromosome. He also discovered a lot of things in the process. And he was able to articulate life in such beautiful ways and had so many different discoveries. But I would encourage a discussion just on him. He was declared venerable by Pope Francis last year, and he's on his way to sainthood for sure. He said this, in that case, so this is the Alabama in vitro fertilization case is going back to the first in vitro case in the United States while Jerome Lejeune was still alive back in 1980-something in Tennessee. It was the first case of impression in the United States of an embryo that was frozen. Two spouses that had split up were battling over the embryos. One wanted to destroy them, and he says, and in his view, Jerome Lejeune came from France to testify to this because he said, I felt like we were reliving 2,000 years ago the decision, do I cut the baby in half or do I give it to the mother who really wants the baby, right? King Solomon. Each of us has a unique beginning, the moment of conception, and all the genetics and all the zoology are there to tell us that there is a link between parents and children, and this link is made of a long molecule that we can dissect, the DNA molecule, which is transmitting information from parents to children from generation to generations. And he went on to explain that this particular human will never happen again. But we're talking about life. We're talking about religious liberty. We're talking about a fabric of society. It's being defined all around us today. At a global level, they just came out, Pew Research, with the latest, they do this every few years and keeping up with it, the Religious Freedom Index. And it's declining all over the world, practically everywhere. The survey finds that overall religious freedom in the world has continued to decline, paralleling the global deterioration of democracy and human rights in general. Amongst its findings for that year were that governments harassed religious groups in 183 countries. 92% of the countries analyzed, up from 178 in 2020. It's declining very, very quickly in direct ways, like in Nigeria, where the governments themselves and different governments are just attacking and killing. And it's interesting, looking at the Global Synod report for the world, when you look at Nigeria and one of the things that they're speaking about as a country, it's getting to Mass. Yet 97% of Catholics in Nigeria go to Mass. In the United States, where we don't have that fear, 17% of Catholics go to Mass every Sunday. Globally, a couple of things here. France, I think all of you saw this in the news a few weeks ago, but as part of the sharing here. France officially enshrined and may be the most direct of any country in the world now of enshrining abortion in the Constitution. Very proudly did that, and even cascaded that in lights and celebrations on the Eiffel Tower, and the whole country celebrated, beginning with Emmanuel Macron, who's Catholic. And now what he wants to pass in France, it's beyond palliative care, which, be careful, whenever you see palliative care, it sounds like hospice. That is riddled. You have to look at the language with euthanasia. Palliative care, buzzword, be aware, is at euthanasia, which has already passed in several states in this country, and that domino effect is happening. But France wants to enshrine its constitution what they're calling a human, caring, loving way to aid in dying. But if you look at what it is, it's euthanasia.
If I may just add, to define this further, the palliative care. The conscience of the physician is to allow the patient some relief by increasing the medication like morphine or whatever is sedating the patient to the point that the patient feels relief. What some of the places are doing are increasing the morphine drip. That is illegal because that is killing by a physician. Because the oxymoron of this whole story is that if you go run into an accident with a woman in the 4th month of pregnancy, they prosecute you for two persons, the woman and the child. But this issue of palliative care is being confused because the issue is to alleviate pain, not to promote death.
That's right. Absolutely right. UK, this is... Go ahead.
I want to point out that, we shouldn't be surprised if France, the French Revolution...
Yeah.
During the French Revolution, for decades, they persecuted Catholics, destroyed churches, killed Catholics. Then United Kingdom, way back, starting with, Elizabeth I and going on, through many, many decades and even more than a century, they were chasing priests, and they were designated, bands of people that were called priest catchers. So, like I said, it's nothing new. It's the same all over again.
So this is eroding, right? Worldwide. And in the UK, this is one of the most disgusting things. So in 3 different cases, just in the last year and a half, 2 years, there's been instances of babies. In this particular case, I'll focus on a teenage girl. Neither her nor her parents had the right to make medical decisions for her anymore, even though she was of age to make those medical decisions, where she had a very, very rare disease and it was terminal, debilitating, but there were some innovations that could have helped her to recover from that. She didn't have the right. And the court even said in the UK, the fact that the experts have spoken and she's not listening to them about her condition means she's not in this mental state to make decisions for herself. That's what the court said. Think about that, right? So the court said, you no longer have a right to yourself. We're going to tell you that no doctor can treat you, you can't be transferred, and you're going to die. And that's what happened to her. Ultimately, she kept fighting it. Baby Indy, this happened a few months ago in the summer. This was horrible. Beautiful little girl. The parents fighting for her to live. The Pope got involved. The president of Italy got involved. The prime minister, the hospital, Bambino and hospital, will take care of all the expenses of baby Indy. And the court said, no, we've decided that we have custody of the baby because the baby is incapacitated. The parents no longer have a right to the baby, even though Even the head of Italy said, I'm going to adopt the baby myself, personally. Our country will adopt the baby, and we will care for the baby and raise the baby. And the UK said, you don't have the right, and the parents don't have the right to give you the baby. And the baby died. Murder. Murder. And there was another example of that, of baby Charlie. You probably heard of him about 2.5 years. Same thing. Same thing. Today, Hong Kong, persecution of priests, they're saying, priests, if you don't cooperate with us in your confessions, right, regardless of what it is, and it could lead to someone having information about something going against the government, and you don't tell us, priests, if you don't unseal the confession, you're going to be prosecuted and you're going to go to jail. That was today, so I added that in there globally. That was just today. At the heart of the battle, at the heart of all of this, of what's happening in our judicial system and worldwide, is at the very heart of it, it's God. His design for humanity and the battle of good and evil. The very definition of, the very right to life of the human person, the right to religious liberty is at stake, and it's playing out. The interpretation of the Constitution, the right to even what is happiness, and you look at what the founding fathers define that to be. And I'll wrap up in 2 slides here. Real quick, the primary groups in the fight doing a tremendous job. There's not that many. This looks like a long list, and there's more other groups. These are the main groups that are going to the Supreme Court, that are fighting for the baby indies of the world globally, that are fighting for all the parents that are losing their rights. It's a Religious Freedom Institute, and they're a worldwide organization based out of Washington, D.C. Alliance Defending Freedom, it's a Christian group started by Alan Sears. They've done tremendous work. The Becket Foundation, also out of Washington, D.C. They're the ones behind a lot of these Supreme Court cases. St. Thomas More Society, that's another one doing these same things, more on the litigation side. The Napa Legal Institute, in recent years, they're helping Catholic institutions, all of them, how to prepare yourselves better, how to make sure you know what your rights are, how to prepare your governance structures and things like that to navigate the world that we're in. The Ethics and Public Policy Center that's putting out these policies and fighting all these different things at a national level. The NCBC, National Catholic Bioethics Center, Catholic Vote, Catholic Healthcare Leadership Alliance. This is now a new voice in healthcare. 21 bishops, the USCCB is involved in it, several hospital systems, have the head of the Catholic Medical Association, the Catholic Medical Association's involved, the Catholic Bar Association's involved, this coalition of groups that are combining law and medicine and being a voice in this country. Now a very, very authentic Catholic faith voice in our country. Knights of Columbus, and I mentioned the other groups. Last slide. What we can do as an ACU. Pray. You know, it sounds like, what do you mean? And that's what this cardinal from Nigeria, in front of 1,000 people, political leaders, etc., he's speaking about the atrocities that he's witnessed and his people are going through, and they're attacking Christian liturgical feast days and when they choose to kill and prosecute. Pray. Prayer works. God is listening. And you look at any place where these sufferings have happened and wars, pray for a country and pray. And that's what everybody was doing there. It's for us to be aware. Be aware. Pay attention to it. There's a lot of news sources out there that summarize a lot of these things. To be formed in it. It's part of our formation. We always have been. And you hear the doctors, you hear we have lawyers, and all of this formation that we have prepares us and helps us to get together to do things. Work for good laws, right? And even further into shaping them. Focus on the natural law, the ethics, the values, and virtues. That's universal, common ground for us to start with in society. Protect the right to evangelize, not just I have the right to go to church. That's not enough. And that's when we went from the beginning. That's not how the church, the compendium, Vatican Council, the documents, that's not religious freedom. That's a basic element of it. Religious freedom is much more than that. It's a right to evangelize, to speak the truth, and to share the faith, to catechize in public square. And part of it goes against what we're seeing in society. We're in an anti-Christian culture. We're in an apostolic mission time. So it's to be aware of all of that. ACU history. And this is a different time, different country, but what's common and was very beautiful is Padre Ray saying, you guys are so prepared, right? Is he encouraged agrupados to discern and to follow if they had a call to be more involved, to promote and uphold and defend their faith and ideals in the public square, right? Through law and even politics. Not to go through what happened or didn't work at that time. He said, you're so prepared to do things. And the ACU was so positioned to be able to participate in ways as a group, if that makes sense. But there's so much strength, right, in the numbers. And this is a beautiful thing, for us to always just use whatever it is, the press, movies, radio, television, which we do, in different ways, indirectly and directly, even politics, to be able to be a voice. And even which is interesting, in past apostolic assemblies, this was pretty cool. There was a nuncio present in one of the apostolic assemblies that said, who heard all of this discussion with Padre Ray about politics and the apostolate. There was a whole session on that. And the nuncio walked away representing the Vatican and said, the climate that prevails at the ACU is the one that the Holy Father has in mind. And this came out of the ACU history. Very beautiful. And just things to contemplate. But pray. Come back to the beginning is pray and to be aware. Be aware, and in the circles that we're in as professionals, right, is the important thing to do of what's around us, to read and respond to the signs and challenges of the time. Is really where we're at with everything, and this is one of those things. So this is just meant to be an overview. Really couldn't go much deeper. We could always go more deeply in the future, but that's the presentation. Thanks for